Cool.
Yeah. So we talked slightly last night. I've been thinking a little bit more about it, but I basically stopped after we had that call. What do you think? It's not complete yet, but there's enough examples there to show each of the different types.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting to roll it up into like a top level NFA that's like a dream catcher.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. I was like, oh, it's funny. It's funny that you do that.
Yeah.
No, look, I mean, we just gotta. This is the system we want to promote, so I can see nothing but good things about it.
All right. Well, I'll go through the kind of observations I've got. I'm flipping now for the stream onto the doc. I know you can't see the doc.
I can see that. I can.
You can.
Where is it?
I'm just inside NFAs on the site.
Yep. Just give me. I can absolutely get that.
I mean, the top level is an interesting process to go through. Essentially making a work breakdown structure, but expressing it as NFAs. And they are subtly different, but they're very similar.
Where am I looking?
So inside of Dreamcatcher Tech GitHub IO, and then that top tab NFAs, which starts roadmap.
Yeah. Any particular one you want me to look at?
No. This is mostly for the stream, so it makes some kind of sense if someone watches this. But the first observation I've got is exactly what you just said. There seems to be a distinction between an NFA that refers to other NFAs and in itself kind of wraps those and presents those as a surface which can generate revenue, versus an NFA which doesn't wrap anything else. I don't know whether we want to make a distinction between those two, but those wrapper NFAs certainly are very useful.
I don't think it matters. I mean, all you're really talking about is a summary task in MS Project.
Right.
Basically, it's not, it's, sure, you can have a summary NFA. Fine. Doesn't make much difference. The system doesn't change. Ooh. And kind of what we want to encourage is to allow the people, to encourage the network model of operation. We want to make it so that anyone can make more sub NFAs if they think that's what is going to get the job done. So we're sort of purposefully not constraining it down to the nth degree. It's just saying we will pay this much for this finished thing. How you go about that, I couldn't care less. You got to divvy up attribution and costs amongst people, fine. We talked about the actor that has provides bridging, so that payments for an NFA that can only come upon delivery, someone can draw down salary by basically getting a loan out against the NFA construction. But someone takes on the risk of making regular payments in the hope that you'll get to the finished goal, and then they share in that goal.
Exactly, and their record of that accounts for an attribution split for that NFA.
Yeah.
Which is effectively is what we were talking about previously was you can put in investment, you can put in sweat investment by taking a lower daily rate, a lower salary than you'd otherwise do, and that seems fair. It's like, you're effectively forward purchasing with investors, effectively forward purchasing the attribution.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Ford's purchasing the NFA and then giving back the attribution is another way to look at it.
Yeah.
Ford's purchased the NFA and then, so two ways you can come at it.
Yeah.
I think the language needs to include Ford's. Like Ford's purchasing NFAs is different to buying ones that are already made.
Yes.
And that's like the Ford's App Store. So when you actually Ford's purchase an app, under the hood the mechanics is actually an NFA, but it's just presented as an app.
Right. Exactly. And
where we left it this morning, or 12 hours ago roughly, was talking about how to capture the problem that the attribution is not fixed.
Yes, and what I suggest for that is, at the moment, you'll see we've got bid attribution split. I think split is misleading there. Essentially, what we're doing is we're just recording that this NFA has noted that these other NFAs, in the view of the person creating the NFA, is due something, without saying what that attribution split is. So we're not defining what this split is.
No, I was intending for us to say something, because I think that you should be able to negotiate an attribution split in order to set expectations of people using the system, particularly first-time users of the system. What I wanted to make sure was clear was that it does not necessarily follow that's whether that's honoured or not depends on the person paying for the thing. I think that negotiated attribution should be honoured by the project if it was left up to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if someone just paid money and was like, "Yeah, look, I'm paying to this project, and I'll just accept their attribution table."
Yeah. Okay. So here's on that point a very I think it's quite an interesting question. I don't know the answer to it, but I've got a proposal. This an NFA up to now. I remember a few weeks ago I was saying that project, person, ghost, and so on have so much in common that actually, if we were to make a prototype of an object with governance, with attribution, with inbox, and so on, then how it's actually used really comes down to which optional fields that you have. Now, if we count an NFA exactly the same way, an NFA has governance and attribution table. So the bid attribution here is how the NFA wants it, or suggests, okay, these guys are worth considering for a split, but we've still got the attribution table that is generated through the attribution algos inside of the wrapping object. So that's how it's actually done. But this bid, it is a bid. This is like we suggest, but it's still down to the governance of the wrapping object to say what the attribution is and can be changed by that governance.
Because the negotiation needs to mean something, but there's two things that can alter what that attribution is.
Mm.
One of them is the person making the payment can vary how the attribution goes for their payments. And number two is by this transactional voting mechanism where anybody can have an opinion on how anything can go. So you can actually negotiate a certain thing, but if you get a large enough weight of votes saying that actually that attribution should have been different, then depending on how the payout algorithm is structured, it will honor a blend of what did you negotiate, what did the swarm votes say, what did other people in the project say. Like, we don't know what that weighting is, and one of the jobs we need is how to make an algorithm that balances all that. But so long as the facility is in there and the understanding that it's going to be, it's not set in stone like it is with a conventional company when you negotiate an attribution percentage in terms of shareholding, right? This is saying that this is what we, at best, that negotiated attribution is what you think and what the purchaser thought. And you arrived at an agreement on what you thought was fair. That doesn't mean that it is fair. And it might not be for a range of different reasons. And ultimately, it's up to the algorithm that could be running decades in the future that decides how that attribution goes by taking in all the data that it has to process. The two key bits of data that will affect that algorithm are votes of like everybody and how the person who paid the money that's being dispersed in this dispersal event wished for it to go as well.
So how is that physically done? If we stick with the object structure we've got, we should move what we've got at the moment under bid attribution split up into attribution, because otherwise we've got a duplication there. So the NFA, if we have it as a type of object like any other, we've already got attribution, we've already got governance, we've already got everything you just talked through. We don't want to have a separate bid attribution split then necessarily.
Oh no, yeah. All I was trying to capture in that field is that is where the negotiation would take place. So we don't have.
Right. I see.
You know what I mean? Like we don't have the negotiation aspect running, but to a user, they don't see the internal mechanics of the objects that we designed anyway. They just see how it surfaces, and the back and forth, at least it's captured in Git, so that, at least it's sort of there, back and forth, and people can pull requests against these files with the different bids that they want.
Yeah, okay. All right. So this is like a scratch space, and then at some point, presumably, we shift from it being a bid attribution to actual attribution, when some kind of consensus is agreed.
Well, once bid is just what we're offering, and then sorry, I think I've done that wrong. Actually, I think that's probably ask, and then bid will be the people who are going to do the work. It's just weird. I got confused because it's like we're doing the work and we're putting out the offers for these first kind of ones. So it's like, bidding and asking simultaneously. What is that called? I don't know. Yeah. The insider trading or something like that. But that was the purpose.
All right. Okay, that kind of makes sense. What I'd like to give a go at. So we've got this NFA. This is still work in progress. This structure, right? What I'd like to do is to try and integrate that into the object structure and see how that negotiation goes backwards and forwards, and then at some point it clicks into attribution. After which, the governance is the thing that changes attribution. The aspect that you're saying where someone could have a contrary view, what I'll point out is these sub NFAs. Anyone can do a pick and mix. So say if in the future someone's thought company formation, company structure, that's nothing to do with the Dreamcatcher. Those guys don't deserve anything. They could create another NFA and just reference the other NFAs. And that wrapper NFA would be another Dreamcatcher, say. It would have to compete in the market and so on.
You mean they could fork? They could fork the NFA. You mean?
You could fork the wrapper NFA and then pick and mix this attribution split. There's nothing stopping in the structure we've got.
I don't get what the point of that is. Can you give me a real simple example?
So say if someone later on thinks actually Dreamcatcher is long enough now in the tooth that the stuff happened years ago with company formation, company structure, that's not really relevant anymore. Everything else is. So I'm going to fork 001 Dreamcatcher initial funding project to another NFA, and then my attribution split is going to just not have 02, 03. It's going to have everything else.
Yeah, okay, all right. So I think what you're saying there is they wouldn't be able to fork it as in like they have no control over it, so it's undeniably sitting there.
Yep.
But what they can do is create a forked, like a multiverse view of it.
Yep.
But really to achieve what you're... Right, so they'd make a multiverse view of that NFA, and it would drop it would drop the attribution to the NFAs that they no longer consider relevant, right?
Right, and the attribution to the ones that they do see relevant, the attribution split inside of those NFAs are still hold, because you can't change those.
Unless they choose to fork down deeper into those ones too.
Right. Yeah.
The attribution under forking like that, the attribution can be changed to anything you want. The two cases where you would do that are, number one, if you were doing transactional voting, so you're not actually doing a dispersal, you're just having an opinion, which everyone loves to have. You're having an opinion, you may have no authority or whatsoever, but at least you're saying that it shouldn't be like that, it should be like this.
Yep.
And then the other option is when you're actually paying money and you're seeing a dispersal happen, you would be free to modify the dispersal tree in that fashion. Processing a dispersal event may also include you being an upstream node that was given the authority by the disperser to disperse it as you saw fit.
Yep.
And so you might have created a modified view of how you thought it should go, and anyone that doesn't take the time to alter what you're saying, it would go to your forked view, which may be different to what the original negotiated position was.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So that's all there. The bid and the ask is really there so that the work is expectation setting between the two parties. They both need to agree and know that ultimately consensus of the masses will be the final say in what their attribution is.
Yep.
And I would like to add that my hope is that if the freeloaders, the people that aren't actually dispersing any money but have an opinion on how it should be dispersed, are kind of going to be the closest to fair, because they're actually disinterested. And I imagine that the smaller the payments get, the closer to fair they become, because that just seems to be how humans are. They're like, well, and we can say to them, look, if you're only paying 50 cents, can you at least divvy that 50 cents up fairly? I mean,
I think you're right. It'd be interesting to find out. But I think you're right. It does make sense. I mean, if you've got a distribution curve and you've only got two samples, it doesn't look much like a curve. As the sample size reduces or becomes more granular, you're getting closer to that distribution curve. So it'd be interesting to see whether that actually occurs. There's a spike.
But that's really the point I want to stress, and anyone who's bidding for this work needs to understand that that's crucial to the function of the dream catcher. There's those two mechanisms which can just sort of override what they get, but primarily the algorithm that does the dispersals is constantly going to be changing. And in fact, I would say that algorithm is the riddle of the dream catcher, because each time you propose a better algorithm, that algorithm also includes a method for how you should get paid for having constructed that algorithm. So it's the only type of task that is self-attributing in a way. Like, it's a very special case of an NFA being completed in that it contains within it its own attribution method. No other NFA has that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also worth pointing out to the stream that it sounds like actually, you could agree and go through all this negotiation and so on and get absolutely nothing, because this can vary in the future and you might get shafted at the end of it. But we've got also the reputation, we've got the transparency of it, we've also got the discoverability and reuse. So if it's a good piece of work, you're just as likely to get more money than less.
Yeah, and you can also say, I'm not agreeing to any attribution. I'm going to leave it fully to the algorithms to decide. Like, you can just be like, I'm not accepting what either side said, but I'm happy to do the work. I need this much cash. I'm actively marking this as deferred.
Yeah. And equally, as say, pay me for my full rate, and I have no calls on this in the future.
Yeah.
So,
Or you can pay me my normal rate, and I'll leave it up to the swarm to decide.
yes.
You can really say anything you want here. It's just we got to put mechanisms in that allow us to correct ourselves later.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going down my list here. The next observation when I was doing this is it was very subtle. It didn't strike me originally, but dependencies which we've got, which is what this NFA uses, depends on. So in this case, the dependencies for the Dreamcatcher initial funding project would be this list. I've not put it in there yet. The attribution list, because it needs each of those things to happen. Dependencies are not the same as attribution, because attribution can change and dependencies can stay the same. So they're disjoint. But also interestingly, project dependencies are not the same. So when thinking about this as an actual work breakdown structure, the project dependencies really come down into sequencing and work that needs to happen in the project, whereas dependencies could be something that's already happened, but you're dependent on it. So why is that?
There's no difference. There's no difference there. Because in a project, you just mark it as a task that was done before the start of this project, so it's done. You depend on it.
It could be another NFA that this project has no control over whatsoever. So, for example,
I don't think there's any difference between those things at all.
If that NFA, for example, updates and does a breaking change, that's not project dependency.
Well, the NFA is not going to cause a change. The work that was represented by the NFA could be modified and moved on, which would have moved on that NFA, but you're still kind of locked to the particular version. You'd have to actively take the upgrade.
Yes, which in itself would be an NFA to make that upgrade compatible if there was a breaking change, for example. But there's, I just think I'm just raising it because when I was thinking, okay, could I build a project out of this? And it's very close. However, the dependencies, because we're talking about a matrix of dependencies out with anything that you have control over that can exist before and can exist after, but isn't part of anything that you're executing. That they're not actually project dependencies. So, yeah.
Well, it's probably just the way it's being described. I mean, a typical project dependency, we're trying to relinquish control of the project dependencies so that people can figure it out themselves. We're turning them into NFAs so that they hopefully get solved independently. Now, I won't go down like that, of course, but perhaps what you mean by project dependency is something happening within a specific NFA that you've chosen to work against.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't see that as any different, and keep in mind that anyone who has any rights over that work can make a sub NFA at any point, and they can bundle any other work they've done into an NFA too. So it's there's no point making that distinction, I don't believe.
Okay, all right. I'm just highlighting.
Anytime any state change occurs, the person who made the state change has the right to turn it into an NFA. Anytime an NFA is made, anybody has the right to fork that NFA and provide a multiverse view of it.
Yes. Well, I wanted to raise that because, as I said, it's a half-formed view, but it did seem that these are different things. And maybe a more concrete example. It wouldn't make a project dependency really comes down to, if you think of a Gantt chart, this needs to happen before this needs to happen, before this needs to happen. It's a project dependency. Dependencies are more like a package dependency. So this needs React version whatever.
Okay, so I think you're more talking about sequencing rather than dependencies.
Right. Exactly.
That's probably,
I think those things are different. It was just
they
an
are.
observation.
If you're talking about tasks that need to be done, like the great sort of conundrum of project management is what is the size of a task below which managing it costs more than the value the task provides, right? And it's sort of like we're trying to leave it up to each level to figure that out for itself, and we really don't want to be trying to tell people how to do their work. It's kind of like this network-based warfare model is about like fucking here's what we need, go figure it out. Don't bother us until it's done.
The rational economic agent view of that is quite curious. I'd argue that the task granularity is really being set by what level an NFA could possibly have future value for reuse by another. And therefore generate revenue.
Nobody knows. Like that's why it's at state change. State change is the smallest possible difference to the system. It could also be considered, multiple state changes can be bundled into and considered one state change.
Right.
Any state change is NFAable, including the special case of the state change that is just the formation of a blank NFA.
Yeah.
That too is a state change and has its own value.
Exactly, and I'd argue that. Well, not even arguing. I would bet that the granularity of a project, exactly what you're saying, below which it actually doesn't make sense to manage, or to break it down further. The granularity of the bet is actually set by the NFA being in itself a valuable chunk of things that could be reused, or the NFA seems to have something to offer project management in terms of what level do you go down to. But that's just a hunch.
But that's really for making forward NFAs.
Yes.
Let's not forget that you get this sort of like this default NFA by just doing something. You don't have to have minted it into an NFA for it to be mintable into an NFA later.
That's a good point, actually, because we're when I was doing this is all top down, but the fact that NFAs generate from state changes is bottom up.
Like a project manager loves to do.
But the bottom up thing, where you've got, so for example, a whole bunch of state changes would be around company formation. Let's pick on that again. And you'd wrap those up into that. But in the planning stage, we're thinking, okay, so how do we get the initial funding project? And we're doing it top down. So there's going to be a point where this meets. And that point where it meets is probably going to be the QA point, I'd imagine. So it's like a whole bunch of state changes that had gone through QA and is agreed, when taken in aggregate, agrees with the top-down definition of what the company formation should be.
Yeah, well, that's when that NFA is considered done. There may have been work that was done that contributed to that NFA that the NFA didn't ask for.
Yep.
So that's an example where, like, that NFA gets completed, but how the attribution was supposed to go didn't work out like that. In fact, like, it's possible for someone to post a forward NFA that they want completed, someone else to come along and be like, you know what, I'm gonna just make it, and then that forward NFA never has to pay out, and someone else got all the attribution. Like, that's sort of...
Well, yeah, because, the work might have already been done.
Yeah.
Take 3.4 attribution algo. We've got to write an attribution algo. Someone comes out of the blue saying, "Oh, I've got one of those." Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll just use yours. Why not?
Yeah, why not? And then sort of at best, we should sort of pay something for whoever pointed that out. But it's kind of like, you got outpaced. You made a bid on the NFA that was asked for, you began your work, and then someone else outpaced you because it was discovered there was something else done already.
Right.
So you'd only get really some. We need to figure out like torn, what it means to have a torn NFA. Like you're partway down the path, you've expended effort, and then something comes along and broadsides you, and you get outpaced, and you're like, you kind of do something because you were going towards it. You expended energy to do it.
That's an interesting point. I don't have an answer to. Yeah, because you don't want to just say, even if we're at 90% of the way there, actually something here is perfect, it's done. Let's use that. You don't want to necessarily dump the 90% on the floor.
Well, yes, you do, if it's better, but what you don't want is to leave the person who did the 90% work on the floor.
Yeah.
Because they would have had some, if they had an agreement with you that you were going to pay them when they completed it, then, and they did the work, then they should get something.
Yes.
For it, right?
Yeah.
Like, because if no one pointed out that there was a better way, they in earnest expended their precious resources, and you were willing to pay for it. So there's an assessment process where someone needs to assess how much percentage-wise was done, so therefore what's owed. End result is the company got what it wanted. It got it faster and it got it cheaper, so it's not bad for them. But you can leave the worker in the lurch if you pour them out, right? But so that probably needs to be part of the negotiation process, where like if you're a worker and you're just like, you know what, pay me at the end. I don't need any protection against getting outpaced. That's fine. Or they might negotiate some protection so that they get something along the way.
I think there's more work to be done there, but yeah, I think that's an important caveat.
Yeah. At the moment, we'd sort of love it if someone came along and did some of this work without us having to do it ourselves or pay for it.
Oh, hell yeah.
Like, we'd kind of be like, mostly us doing the work would be like, cool, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure the shame would be if you're, a jobbing day rate coder trying to make a living and someone does that.
Yeah, that's not, and that's rude. It's rude to do that to someone.
Yeah. Okay, the next observation is around, for example, 00.
There's an amazing sunset going on here.
Oh man, let's have a look.
Let me just.
Oh, you're back. Oh, you're off. Ah, look at that. You got a flare. That's a sunset flare, isn't it?
It's like proper flare.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a nice piece of, not dissimilar from Scotland. You found yourself there. That looks very similar to Scotland, except for some of the trees. Beautiful, beautiful.
Except for the fact that it's warm.
Well, give it 6 months. Right. The next observation is when it got to the point where it started to talk about marketing. And it's like, okay, marketing is that the thing that coders think is, and I have for many years and probably still do, just dismiss it, but it's absolutely necessary if you want to eat. I
just never met a marketer that I liked.
No, but I'm sure marketers feel the same way back, and we've got to live together, right? So on the marketing thing, it seemed to make sense that an NFA was actually a time-boxed piece of marketing that had an intended outcome.
Yeah. I mean, it's depending on how you set your doneness. It could have been jogging on the spot for 40 hours.
Well, yeah, or I don't know, streaking down Oxford Street or something like that. But
like it just if you set your NFA as expenditure of energy. Hey, I found a really good document called the Federal Acquisition Rules document, which is what the US government mandates for all the different types types of contract that their departments are allowed to engage in with suppliers, including the conditions that you must include for all of them. So they do include an effort-based type of contract. If there's no way to define the work, they have like fixed price, fixed cost, agreed margin. They have all these different structures that they use to engage with different types of supplier, including R&D people, software developers, that type of thing, the whole lot. So that's kind of good for someone's done a lot of work on the things that you're talking about there.
Interesting. Okay, I'll check that out. But
I think honestly, marketing, like if you want to pay someone to do marketing, it's like this is the chunk that they do, and this is how we measure their work, and off they go, and we just stick to our guns and not let someone fucking weasel word their way out of it and be like, you can't measure us. Fuck off. We can measure everything. Fuck off.
You can measure. At the very least, you can measure the fact that they've done it. It's like,
okay, so on that topic though, like if I had money to invest, I would not want to spend it on marketing. Because I'm like, to me, I'd want to spend money on this project so that I could use it to do other projects, which those projects might have marketing budgets, but this one, I'm sort of like,
all right,
I don't care.
Let me give you a counterexample. Although I definitely lean towards your view. I'm an investor. I've got attribution to an NFA. I've got quite a lot of attribution for that one. I'm thinking this could do far better. So I'm going to turn up and I'm going to market it. That is an NFA itself. That NFA should get reflected inside of the NFA is marketing. And I'd argue, and then under governance that can be added to attribution for putting in effort. But also that increases the revenue running to that NFA, and so I benefit kind of both sides.
Yep.
So it doesn't actually make sense that someone would come out of the blue and say, I'm going to market that. It's a bit like, if I own enough shares in a publicly listed company, I might want to wear a T-shirt with their logo on and go around telling everyone how great it was.
I understand all those things. What's your point, though?
My point was, you're saying that you'd never invest in marketing. I can easily see why someone would invest in a marketing NFA.
I was simply meaning for this particular project, because what I would like to do, this particular project right now.
Yeah.
Because I think that my money, or I can't. If an investor comes to me and says, "Where should I spend their money?" it would be weird for me to not tell them to spend it like I would spend my own.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So what I actually think we should do is take because you made this top level Dreamcatcher NFA.
Mm-hmm.
If we think that, or you described the Ford's NFA that is to be the Dreamcatcher Phase 1 or Phase 0 or whatever, there should be breakdowns of Ford NFAs that constitute that. One of them is software, one of them is ops. There might be a marketing one, right? And the point I'm getting at is that we can map those directly at the top level to share classes in a private company.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can say that, the software share class, you can invest your cash and you can choose that you only want to put it into the software share class, which aims to achieve the top level software NFA. You can put your money into the marketing NFA share class, which at the top level is in charge of all these marketing things. That's the sort of thing I want to
Isn't that already covered?
Get into, right? Like
I think I'd argue that's already covered, because you would, in the case of the structure we've got at the moment, say if you only wanted to put it into software, then you would be investing
Yeah,
inside of
I
the
know
joint
what you.
venture.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that we create a share class in the company that represents a
Oh, I see. You're
particular
talking about the legal
NFA.
legal structure. Yeah. Absolutely, I agree. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
and
thought we
so
were talking
we
about dream
actually
catcher there.
we actually name the share class as the NFA,
Yeah.
which then it sort of bonds these things even more deeply into the structure of the company, and then we let investors pick and choose. Really, it's like if you don't like marketing, then don't put your money in there.
That's a really good idea. I like that a lot. We
I,
could
I
we could
think so
just
because it means that each of these NFAs can be fractionalized and given legitimate securities status. And then once we get the software systems up, people can actually vote on how that money should be spent, which makes it look more and more like the DAO that we want to ultimately get running.
yeah. I like that idea.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. Okay, that's the end of my observation list. This is a good exercise. This next, I've not completed these documents because obviously there's none of them got dependencies and so on. Well, that one has just randomly. I'm looking at 009 launch marketing, but so I'll fill this out so it's internally coherent, and at that point, I think we can map that to the company structure, which is actually an NFA in itself, company formation. And I would like to see what the overlap is and how we wrap this into the kind of prototypical object, which includes governance, which includes attribution, includes comments, and all that sort of thing. Because I think NFAs feel like just any other kind of object, just with this information
Sure.
abstract.
Sure, but I mean, yep, you're right. I agree with you there. Okay, but we need to get these NFAs defined, get some actual pricing and timelines against them, and then see if we can't raise against them.
Yeah, and also get because this is get some issues raised against this initial run through of the NFAs are. See if anyone in our small band of brothers can come up with any others or disagrees. Things should be split into more granular, or less granular, and so on. So there's a kind of negotiation at this stage, which is quite interesting because this is this process that any startup would go through. There's negotiation inside with the guys that are actually going to be doing the work and going to turn up the work and say, well, is that the right thing to do? Is this the right level of granularity? Do we need more information about some parts of this and so on?
Yeah, it's funny, but like doing it in NFAs first makes it more feels more honest.
Yeah. Well, remembering where NFAs came from originally was ghosts being renamed, and ghosts were the representation of an asset, and that asset is inside of a project. So it feels like this works. This works very well.
No, man, that is not where NFAs came from.
No, it is because Troy originally was talking about renaming ghosts. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
This originally came from I created the item called traces.
Yes. Okay. So we've got a bit of convergence there. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Granted. Yeah.
Well, traces and ghosts were very different. The ghost is a thing. An NFA represents a bundle of state changes.
Yes.
That's not a thing.
Yes. No, you're quite right. But there's that conversation around how do you represent a thing? Let's take it kind of back one step.
Yeah.
So what we've got
but
here.
But an NFA is not necessarily a thing.
What else could it be? It represents a bunch of state changes which have occurred.
Yeah, it represents effort, but things as an object, like pieces of program or things like that. That's not what the NFA represents. The NFA represents the effort that made it.
Yes, okay. However, inside the Ghost, we also has state changes for services and so on. It doesn't matter. It was a side.
Right.
It's just, I'm confusing things by putting that.
Okay.
I'm pulling myself out of that.
It's not. NFAs came from traces. It's the renaming of traces.
All right. Okay. I'm pulling myself back up from that rabbit hole. But okay, so those.
Lucky we're in good now, so that we can actually like fucking check that shit.
Exactly. It doesn't actually matter because it is recorded. But so that's what I'm going to spend today to do.
Okay.
Look and see how this integrates with the rest of the dictionary process and completing these NFAs out. They're already up on Git, and then put it out to everyone to comment on. And I'll think more about these torn NFAs. Not sure what to do about that on the top of my head, but it's.
Oh, okay. So I'm still working on the in-browser database. There's a bit of a performance bottleneck on storing large amounts of data quickly in the browser. Can be unpredictable. I got a good fix for it. I'm currently putting that in, so that's what I'm working on.
Oh, by the way, I love the performance graphs that you put into the site.
They're nice, hey? Like, they run every time.
That's a thing of beauty. Let's see if we can bring them up. Where were they?
Yeah, every time. Every time. So I mean, that's pretty good, right? Like, it's kind of like a 30 millisecond block time. It should be a lot quicker. I mean, I made those changes to the model system that make it so that it's the same amount of time no matter how many channels you have. Like, you can have like 50,000 channels, and adding one takes the same amount of time every time. That's a hard property to win.
Sure how you did that. That sounds unfeasible. But
that's how it works now. And as a side sort of, I also got diffing out of that. So the blocks are that they don't actually do this bit, but the internal structure's there so that it actually stores diffs in the database because it's tracking diffs to be able to do that constant time thing. It also means that the in-memory representation of that block and all the previous blocks actually takes very little memory because they all share the same actual memory piece. They just represent it with just the diff on top. So I'm pretty happy with where all that's at. It's just, it could be faster, but, like, the speed it gains is when you have 20,000 channels and it still takes 30 milliseconds. That's where it wins over everything else.
Nice.
So, but yeah, I mean, it should actually be like block time should be about 5 or 6 milliseconds. It's frustrating. It needs a lot of tuning, but I'm trying to get features in first.
Yeah, quite right.
So yeah, in browser, and then after that it'll be in browser syncing with server, and then that's kind of the platform, at least in a shitty version. And then we can start putting Dreamcatcher pieces up in chain form because we'll have persistence.
I'm so looking forward to that, and we do have half a dozen tests up using the dictionary definitions. So I really look forward to that bit. That'd be cool. That'd be well.
It's so nice to get on with those. Yeah.
Right, man. Why don't we leave it there then? It doesn't look that warm there, by the way. The whole kind of hat and hoodie up. You saying?
There's mosquitoes.
Okay. Fair one.
Mosquitoes, and I'm sunburnt as fuck. I went out on a pair. Sophie organized a pair of jet skis today. Went ripping around the place on the.
Brilliant.
Dangerous things.
Right. I'll see you in Discord.
Sounds good.